Welcome to this module titled Formative Assessment Techniques that was designed and produced by GoTeach11. Your journey starts here. The objective of this lesson is to explain the role of formative assessments, to examine a few different formative assessment techniques, and to design 2 different formative assessments. You'll demonstrate your learning in a 10-minute mini lesson. To earn credit for this module, you'll need to ask 5 to 8 questions to check students' understanding. You must use at least 2 formative assessment techniques at different portions of the mini lesson. You'll read about a few techniques from Teach Like a Champion 2.0, so have that book handy. Now that we're focused, know how we'll show our learning, and have our tools to get started, let's get sculpting. Masterpieces like the one shown on the screen don't happen overnight. There's a process to achievement. It starts with learning and practice. We know that when teachers can provide the right sort of feedback alongside this practice, growth happens, and it happens more efficiently than if the student was learning completely on their own. One of the most exciting aspects of teaching is when students apply the feedback we give. We start to see progress in their knowledge and skills. This progression of learning, feedback, and growth leads to successful transfer of knowledge and achievement in authentic settings. Teachers use formative assessments after learning to deliver the right sort of feedback at the right time. Imagine it's the end of the school year and you're hitting the home stretch right before summer starts. You realize, you haven't hit the last few TEKs about research, and you want students to practice their speaking skills by making a presentation. You tell the class, okay class, I'm giving you 3 weeks. Research a topic of your choice and present a thesis on it. You must cite 4 sources and present for at least 10 minutes. Ready, go. It's 3 weeks later. You've really been enjoying your desk time and hoping that they've been getting everything on their own. It's time for the presentations and, what have I done? 2/3 of the student aren't even close to having a presentation ready, and the other third presented, but it was pretty much like listening to nails on a chalkboard. What went wrong? Well, there needed to be checkpoints in between those 3 weeks. Formative assessments are the checkpoints that you place intentionally into different parts of your lessons, different parts of the unit, to stop, ask questions, see what your students know, or find out to what degree they're progressing in mastery of the knowledge and skills that are outlined in the TEKs. Formative assessments are the small, regular checks for understanding that you intentionally design to see what students know and to what degree they can apply that knowledge. These terms, formative assessment and checks for understanding, are often used interchangeably, and we'll do the same in this module. Formative assessments are the questions that you ask students to check their understanding. They could be in the form of quizzes or homework. They can receive grades, but they're also more than that. Formative assessments can be less formal and do not always need to have grades connected to them. Formative assessments can take the form of informal data that you collect. Meaning, maybe you're listening on students' conversations during a turn and talk to see what sorts of vocabulary they're using or how they're explaining concepts, where you're listening for any sort of misconceptions. We wouldn't penalize students for not knowing something and give them a bad grade for it. We would just know that from this informal formative assessment, we may need to clear up a few things in the future. Formative assessments go beyond grades. It's a continual monitoring of student learning that allows you to collect information and adjust instruction as needed. You'll hear the term summative assessment as well, and they're related to formative assessments. Formative assessments are the checkpoints of learning, whereas summative assessments are the final destinations of learning. If you look at the images of the screen and imagine yourself as a ceramics instructor, The formative assessments would represent the feedback that you give at every step of the way in sculpting a cup. The final product, after the cup comes out of the kiln, would be a summative assessment of all the cup crafting skills the student has been developing. Formative assessments happen throughout lessons and within units, whereas summative assessments happen at the end of units and even courses. The STAR test is an example of a summative test that measures several skills. You prepare for the STAR test by giving smaller, shorter, formative assessments that check to see how a student is progressing in each skill. Check your understanding to this point. What's a formative assessment? Why should they be used? What's the difference between formative and summative assessments? Take a moment to pause and consider these questions. If you feel like you have a good understanding, let's move forward to learning about a few different formative assessment techniques. A big reason why we need to stop several times to check for understanding is because we can't assume students have learned everything that we taught, even when we think we're doing a good job teaching. It's not guaranteed that they've learned it. Try avoiding questions like, is everyone clear? Everyone got it? We good to go? The reason is that students, especially at a young age, before they're really working on developing self-regulation skills, are poor judges of whether or not they truly understanding or the degree to which they understand it. They simply don't have the insight, perception, or understanding of the levels of knowledge like you do. Rejecting self-report means not accepting, without having evidence that they actually do have the knowledge. There are better ways to truly see what students know, and that's a skill we're working on in this module. Affirmative checking is inserting checkpoints into your lesson where you can confirm that students' knowledge is accurate. They're working on things the right way and continuing to be productive. When it's not, or when there's a flaw in their knowledge, that's when you give feedback so they can work on getting it right. In the next few slides, we'll explore 4 techniques that allow you to get in on students' knowledge and provide feedback so the cycle of learning can lead to a progression of growth. The first technique is called Quick Write. Never been crazy about the name, but I am crazy about the technique. It's super simple with low prep time. What you do is prepare a question that's related to your topic of learning and have students respond to the question silently for a few minutes in writing. It's not just the writing that's important, but it's the follow-up too. While students write, you move around the class scanning to see what sorts of ideas that they're writing. After a few minutes, you have students do a paired discussion or small group talk, and you listen for the academic vocabulary they're using or not using. If students aren't using the words you want them to, that means you'll need to reinforce the terms before you go on to a whole group debrief. Since you've seen what students have written and listened in on the discussions, you'll know what level to start the conversation at and bring some of the good insight from student collaboration in more efficiently than having to check in on what every single student wrote. Now, the success of the quick write is dependent on the question that you have students respond to. In the next module, you'll learn about writing questions that promote deeper levels of thinking. But for now, I wanted to provide some here that could potentially create checkpoints for students' understanding before moving on to the main learning for the day. Questions like, why do we make art? Where does water go after it rains? What might you do to avoid getting a cold? How can you decide which size cereal box is actually the better deal? Is an individual more important than the group? Explain. And does survival of the fittest still apply today? Students will need some time to think, and they'll be able to do that when they write. Depending on the responses they give, you'll know their levels of learning and be able to make decisions about the next steps in your lesson. We're ready for our second technique, cold call. Cold call can occur at any time in the lesson cycle as a quick way to check students' understanding. The essence of cold call is that you ask a question to the class and then call on a student to answer the question verbally. There's absolutely nothing innovative or revolutionary about asking a question and then calling on a student for a verbal response. However, there are several nuances and variations that Doug Lemov explores in his book Teach Like a Champion 2.0 when he discusses the cold call technique. One of the nuances of cold call is being strategic about who you call on. When you call on a student who has their hand raised, their answer might be giving you a false sense of security that most of your students know the answer as well. Here's why. We know that a student who has their hand raised was likely actively listening. Maybe that makes them more likely to know the information. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but what about the students who don't have their hand raised? Why don't you call on them? Why didn't they have their hand raised in the first place? Was it because they weren't following along? Was it because they don't know the information? Was it because they do know, but they'd rather do their own thing and not participate in the conversation? Or was it because no matter what, they know you're going to call on Karen because she always seems to have the right answer? The point here is we need to consider who we call on and how we call on them. Using a selection randomizer such as popsicle sticks or an online randomizer tool helps minimize selection bias and allows you to potentially get more accurate data from a wide range of students in your class. Thus, varying your selection techniques from random to specific serves different purposes. The steps in cold call are asking the question, waiting a few seconds, and then calling on a student. Cold call is distinct because it follows this specific order. We don't call on a specific student first before asking the question because we want every student to consider the question and actively be formulating a response in their heads so they can be ready to share if the teacher calls on them. You can maximize their thinking by letting students know, hey, we're doing a cold call, put your hands down, I'll call on random students. This way, there's a chance that, you'll get called on. Even if your hand is up or not up, I better listen closely because I might be called on. Cold call creates this positive tension. It's a simple technique and works best when you have questions pre-planned and can even record information about the answers that students respond with. Here are two examples of the cold call technique. One is in science and the other's in math. For the science example, imagine that we're going over an experiment and then stop and check for understanding before starting with the lab. Questions we could ask is, what's a dependent variable in the experiment? What's an independent variable in the experiment? And how might we ensure the data you collect is accurate? For the math one, imagine that you just learned about finding surface area in 3D objects. You're ready to have students apply the learning in a real-world situation, and you present them with a rectangular bathroom shower tiling project. You could present the situation, have them read the problem, and follow up with cold call questions similar to these. How much money do we have to spend? What's the cost of each square foot of tile? How could we find the total surface area of the shower? And how might we figure whether we'll have enough money to buy the tiles? The questions are asked in a quick succession. If a student gets an answer wrong or doesn't want to answer, I provide cues to help them with their thinking or move to a different student before returning to them. Also, notice how the questions increase in complexity. They move from basic understanding to more higher order thinking. By pre-planning your questions, you can increase the rigor of the cold call as you ask the questions, and even ask different levels of students different levels of questions so they can all experience stimulation and success. See this formative assessment technique in action by navigating to my.teachlikeachampion.com and watching clips 28 and 32 to 34. As you watch, consider what would need to happen before each of the cold calls. Consider your own mini lesson. What would you need to do before you had your very own cold call? Our third formative assessment technique is Show Me. Show Me has a similar benefit to Quick Writes in that everybody can actively participate in the assessment at one time. In Show Me, you ask the entire class a question, and they respond with a visual cue, either in hand signals or by using a writing surface such as a dry erase board. Scan pages 47 to 51 and Teach Like a Champion 2.0 to learn more information about this technique. Then also watch the 2 video clips that accompany the reading. As you watch the video clips, take note of how every student shows their answer at once. The teacher gives them a cue. There's a procedure to them showing the answer at once. And this is purposeful as it's going to minimize students changing their answers or looking around before writing their own answer. All of this is intended to get more reliable data. Here we have a bit more information about Show Me. The information in the speech bubble tries to illustrate using a procedure with the Show Me technique. It says, write down your answer to this problem. Put the cap on your marker when you finish to show me you're done. Show me your board on 2, 1, 2, and then students show the board. Other opportunities for Show Me with hand signals are on a scale of 1 to 4, A, B, C, D, where 1 is A, 2 is B, 3 is C, and 4 is D. Thumbs up or thumbs down for agreeing or disagreeing. And then moving to the boards, which line shows you the best evidence for this or this? Write the mood of the scene in the form of a smiley. Or which of Newton's laws of motion most applies to the situation, where you show them different images or situations and then they write which of Newton's laws would apply. These are, of course, certainly not all of the options. These are just some ideas that you could use with the Show Me technique. Our fourth and final formative assessment technique is the exit ticket. Exit tickets are super basic. Everybody in the field of education knows about them. An exit ticket is when you ask students to write the answer to one final question before they leave to go to the next class or move on to the next subject for the day. Exit tickets can take many forms. Maybe it's solving one final math problem and writing their answer on a scratch piece of paper. Maybe it's writing a short paragraph where they explain something with evidence from the text in their journals. You don't always need to grade exit tickets. In fact, it's probably best that you don't. It doesn't matter so much what they turn in or what the format the exit ticket is in. What is important is that we do something with the information that we're gathering. Once you receive the exit tickets, you analyze what you got. You dig through the information and look for patterns in the answers. When students provide accurate responses, great. When they don't, what does their wrong answer reveal? Do we see any patterns or misconceptions? When we see what the levels of understanding are, we decide what we need to do to give feedback and facilitate growth. This is the definition of responsive teaching: monitoring student data, adjusting instruction, and leading them at just the right level so they're ready to take the next step in progression. Congratulations, you've learned the role of formative assessments and even learned a few formative assessment techniques. In the next few slides, we'll review how to apply this learning in a 10-minute mini lesson. Let's look at the proficiency rubric one more time. To earn credit for this module, you'll need to pre-plan the questions that you'll ask. You'll ask about 5 to 8 of them. We'll use 2 different formative assessment techniques at different portions of the mini lesson. They could be Quick Write, Show Me with the signals, Show Me with the boards, Cold Call, or Exit Ticket. For that extra challenge, use 3 or more formative assessment techniques, close with a formative assessment, and record pertinent information on a data tracker. Here are a few tips to help you prepare for the mini lesson. Start with the TEKS and select one that you'll base the learning off of. When you consider which TEKS to use, identify some of the basic knowledge the students will need to have to master the TEKS, because you can ask questions based on whether or not they can recall what some of those basic academic terms even mean. You'll use your planning skills to create a task that requires students to apply their knowledge or skills. Consider starting, though, with a direct teach, where you might resurface some information from a previous learning, or you can choose to even teach some basic information. This could happen verbally by using the dry erase board, or you can even prepare a small presentation where students take notes or participate in the learning in other ways. Then lead them to a problem, or provide a small passage, a small text, or even a graphic where students can practice the learning, apply the learning. Remember to ask questions at different times in the task, either at the beginning, the middle, or the end of the micro teach. Maybe you ask them questions before they get into the problem solving, where you're resurfacing learning, seeing whether or not they remember what they learned or what some of these terms mean. Maybe you ask them questions after they've had a chance to read the problem or the short text, or you also ask them a question at the very end of the learning in the form of an exit ticket. Finally, you may want to wait to create all your questions until you watch the next module, Extending Thinking, as a module will provide guidance for generating questions to use in the formative assessments and also creating those higher order thinking questions. If you need more guidance, please reach out to a teacher certification coach, as we're here to help. We'll have whiteboards and dry erase markers if you choose to use a version of the Show Me technique, so you won't need to worry about purchasing those or making them available to participants. In addition, if printing is not a good option for you, remember you could always project the text onto a screen, which works just fine. We've presented 4 basic techniques here. If you've learned other formative assessment techniques and sessions from the teacher certification process, please feel free to use those as well. Thank you for watching this course titled Formative Assessment Techniques that was designed and produced by GoTeach11. Feel free to go back and review this module at any time as you prepare for your upcoming mini lesson. This video referred to content from Doug Lemov's Teach Like a Champion 2.0. Images were downloaded from 123RF and Pixabay.